Welcome to the Bible Savvy Podcast, a weekly conversation about how to understand, enjoy, and apply God's Word. It's time to jump into a new passage from the Bible Savvy reading plan.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm here with Pastor Courtney and Pastor David. And David, you have a question for us.
I've got a question. Now, normally the question doesn't have a lot to do with the passage, but because I saw the passage, my brain started moving in a certain direction. We're talking about something that has been dubbed the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11 today. And so that started me thinking, okay, Hall of Faith, like Hall of Fame. Started to think, like, what are you famous for? Made me think world records. So the question today is, if you had to attempt a Guinness World Record, what would it be for? Like, if you had the opportunity that said you have the chance to have the world record be famous for this random thing, what would it be for?
What are you doing?
Well, Clayton was reading some, to be fair.
Yeah, so we knew ahead of time, so I've been looking up categories.
Yeah. And there's categories, I mean, there's some where it's like you're an individual, right? Like, this is my individual, or you're a part of a crowd, or things like that. I definitely don't want one that takes like years of time. Like, I don't need the most of something that I have to like collect, or like,
what about like most
a long one,
cross-country meets, track meets that you
that
celebrated with your kid or something like that?
How many races have you run along with that you didn't have to run?
That you didn't have to. Like, that's you probably do have that record
in
for the
cross-country
record.
meets. I probably do, actually. I'm literally in the next 24 hours going to 2 track meets. Like, if that tells you something. In 2 different states, actually. That's the record. Like,
record.
You know, the most, the one I went to is like some of the crowd ones. Like, it would be fun to be in like the crowd that created the loudest laughter or something like that. So like the loudest decibels of loud. Like, can you imagine how much fun it would be to be in a crowd where they were literally just trying to make everybody laugh? So that they could say,
no, it'd be fun.
We have come up with, like, this is the loudest.
There's a lot of pressure on that, though.
Laughter.
If you're like,
I'm a loud laugher.
We're all going to laugh.
I'm loud in general, but let's just.
It is really hard to pick because they're all just so bizarre. Like, we're reading all of these things, and it's like the most spoons balanced on your face, or you know what I mean, and that sort of thing. We actually found the list of discontinued ones. We had to look ahead. We were like, what are we doing? And the one that's most curious to me, the largest audience at a camel wrestling festival. And I was like, that's oddly specific, you know? Or the one they discontinued, the largest ever mass balloon release, like, would be really cool to be a part of. But if you actually look it up, it's in the 80s in Cincinnati, I think, and it like screwed up all sorts of things, like air traffic control and like the environment, like birds are dying, and it was just awful. So they stopped doing those things. So some of these are pretty hilarious. I think I would want to be one that was a big group thing. Mm-hmm. That would be the most fun, and it's also the most doable. Like, some of these are things where it's like the most tattoos. You're like, no,
thank you.
No,
nothing to prove.
Nothing. Yeah, it's okay.
Nothing
you
to
win.
prove.
Oh, I tried. You know. So I think something that would be like, you know, a mass thing where I don't know if it's laughing or, you know, dancing or whatever. Like, the most people to be in a crowd doing something, because then it's just like, hey, we did it or we didn't do it.
The biggest flash mob.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
You got something.
Okay, you set me up like perfectly, and I have to apologize because I didn't. You guys don't know this.
We don't know anything,
but I'm actually in the Guinness Book of World Records.
No way.
With a group doing a group thing.
Okay.
The largest water balloon fight ever done.
Oh.
So
wow.
So I have just so Courtney, you can see on my.
Whoa.
You can verify on largest water balloon fight.
Okay.
Christian Student Fellowship at the University of Kentucky, where I used to work.
Yep.
8,957 people.
That's all it takes?
Yeah.
We can beat that.
175,141 water balloons used during the fight. So
I feel like next Easter.
I think we should do this.
We've got a great field for it.
I'm sure everybody would be like, I'm in my Easter best. Yes, I'll take that water balloon. This is good.
But we used it as like when students would move back to campus, we're like, hey, you know, come join us and let's try and let's get in the world record.
Awesome.
And so it was like a big outreach event we did. And so
I thought it was going to be some nerdier thing at like a game convention or Star Wars
hours
things.
watching Star Wars. It's no, it's world's largest water balloon fight. So
wow,
and it was over in like 24 seconds. You know,
yeah,
I mean, like 175,000 balloons over quickly with that amount of people.
How much
it's the
injury,
balloons.
too.
It's the balloons that's the real like challenge, right? Like
Yes.
it's preparing all those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Whoever got that award, who prepared the most balloons for
A lot of
water
great
balloon.
student leaders, a lot of
My
servants of the
fingers are
kingdom, a
wrinkly.
lot of servants of the
My
kingdom
fingers.
over many weeks of
That's
preparation.
who
yes.
invented that new
The
the
little
hose.
mass one?
Yeah, the mass one.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, why don't we turn to the Bible after that? We are in the book of Hebrews, continuing on. We're in Hebrews chapter 11. So just a reminder of some context. Always go check out the Bible Project video. We're getting closer to the end of the book, and sometimes I find it good to go back and watch those. I get it better at the end sometimes. But part of what Hebrews is doing is saying it's worth sticking with Jesus. He is better than anything else. And there have been people all throughout the story of God's work in the world who have stuck with God even when it was hard, and it was worth it for them. So when we get to chapter 11 here, it's probably the most famous chapter in the book of Hebrews. Sometimes it's called the Hall of Faith, and it's examples of people who stuck with God even when it looked like it was hard, or they couldn't see the end of the road, or those sorts of things. And it's part of what the author of Hebrews is doing, is saying all this stuff that we're doing with Jesus and the church and all this stuff, this is a continuation of a story that's been going on a long time, and you're still a part of it. And so we're going to read, I think we're just going to read the first half of this. Is that right, Courtney?
Through 22 is
Through
what
22. All right, let's go.
All right, chapter 11. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead, and so, in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones.
All right. There's a lot there. And what's interesting is that hopefully after we have spent the last year reading the Pentateuch, that a lot of these stories are very familiar to people who've been reading along with Bible Savvy. That's part of why we put Hebrews at the end of this year, because there's a whole lot of references that suddenly you're like, oh, I know that. And you're kind of looking back at previous movies in the, biblical cinematic universe, and you're seeing those references here. So let's make some observations. What do you guys see here?
Well, guys, I don't know if you noticed there was a repeated phrase.
Yes.
By faith. Sometimes you read scripture and you're looking for repeated words. You're like, were there repeated words? This one is so obvious. But in a way, it like almost felt like a melody, like a song almost, where there was a rhythm to it, where it's by faith you mentioned the cinematic universe. Like it felt like that pump up speech, at halftime from Coach saying, and by faith, that's what, here's how they persevered. Here's how they fought through. So it makes you lean in like, what's the next one? What's the next one? What's the next one? And there's some good, I think just the rhythm to it is really, really interesting.
Yeah. Well, people will say the book of Hebrews is written like a letter, but it reads like a sermon. It feels like something that a pastor would prepare to preach. And it's almost like after this pastor has like explained, like done all this detail, like, let me tell you about the Old Testament, whatever. And then it's like the crescendo. It's like, and this is the real preacher moment. You know what I mean?
This is the sound clip that's getting used over and over again. Oh yeah, for sure. Well, and that word faith in the title of this section was faith in action. And I think sometimes we think of faith as, I put down, it's not just a feeling, it's an action. And then I had some other observations in there as well. But one of my favorite verses, kind of questions that is posed in the Gospels is, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? And so I wrote that down as I was like reading through it, because I thought this is evidence of how he would find faith on the earth. This is like, when Jesus comes, how will he find faith on the earth? Well, he'll find it from faith in action, not just the mindset. So I went through and again, people are always curious about how I use colors and things like that. But I went through and circled who had the faith and then what did they do? Like, what was their action? So it's, we understand Abel brought, he was commended. Abel still speaks. Enoch was taken from the slide. It goes through. Noah built an ark. Noah condemned the world. Abraham obeyed and went. There are lots of verbs that tell what was the move that was made by the person. Was one of the ways I used color as I was observing today.
Yeah. One of your question there, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? That connects with one of the observations I had. And it's how in most of these examples, the person is standing against the crowd, right? Like there's something in the situation that makes it that they're moving against the grain, whether it's Noah doing this or Abraham in a situation where it's like, look, none of this makes sense. You know what I mean? Like we're old and whatever. And Abel's opposed by his brother. And there are all of these people who have a whole lot of reasons to say it doesn't make sense to have faith here. And so there's something precious about it. Like, will God find faith, right? Yeah. Well, in these cases, he did, even though there are a whole lot of circumstances that said there shouldn't have been.
Yeah.
So that was my observation.
Well, and I wrote a little note too that I said these people were living in the present as if the future is true.
Yeah.
Because all of them were making actions didn't make sense in the present, but they had considered the future and taken action. There are lots of thought words in here as well. Even the idea of having confidence, like how do you get confidence in something? Well, you know it, right? You've considered it. An assurance about what we do not see, like that's a mindset that we're looking at future things. There were some other places where it's Sarah wasn't able to bear children because she considered him faithful. Like considering something is like, that's not, it's seeing evidence of God's faithfulness. She considered and thought, okay, I've seen things happen before.
Yeah.
So I can have faith this would happen again. Even, Abraham, the things he did, they don't make sense unless you kind of have reason behind them.
Well, yeah, and it says he reasoned that God could do this, right?
Yeah. He has. It was the idea of reasoning. As I was like, there's a lot of reasoning that is happening through all of this. They're thinking on, okay, Abraham. Verse 19, Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. So as he's about to do something that's radical, really, he's about to sacrifice his son. He didn't just, okay, I'll do it. It was a reasoned move. Like they made these moves. There was consideration. There was, reasoning. There was, if you kind of think through it.
Yeah. It's interesting, the two observations you made. One is you're saying faith is an action, but there's also a lot of like shift of your mindset, like thinking and imagining the right way leads to action. I love that because those two things go together. And some people will fall on one or the other, like just do what it is, or just get the right ideas. It's like, no, these things feed each other.
Yep.
I love that. That's really cool.
And most of the time, people don't talk about reason and your mind involved with faith. It feels like just an emotional thing, like just believe in your heart, not reason with your mind. So I that's an interesting observation. One of my observations in verse 4, it said, "By faith Abel still speaks, even though he is dead." And I just wrote the word legacy. And I started to think like, okay, that's the first like story, but really it's like every single one of these stories is they're still speaking even though they're dead. Like it's sort of like it says it about Abel, but really it almost feels like a declaration. Here's how all these biblical narratives and these people are still speaking to us right now. I mean, here we are thousands of years later, hearing their story. They're still speaking to us because of their faith, and that was that felt significant to me. Even just thinking outside the text. I mean, we just went through a leadership transition here, thinking like Pastor Jim has passed the baton on. It's like he's not the senior pastor, but his voice is still speaking because his impact, his faith, let out.
Yeah, I noticed the repeating word of promise. So there's something there where you say, all right, I've gotten something from God that he says he's going to do. Do I actually believe it? Do I actually trust it? Like, faith isn't just a belief in something in the abstract. It's in a person who's saying, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. And you guys say, do I trust that person? Which is something we do all the time in ordinary life. There's a challenge of saying, well, will I believe God to do it? But I think it's interesting. God makes a promise. There's a relationship there. Will you trust him to do what he says?
Yeah. Well, and along those, I love it, starting in verse 13, where it talks about all these people are still living by faith when they died. They didn't receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance.
Yeah.
And then where it says, if they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Again, it goes back to like they were living in the present, but believing in the future, that this is that. And again, for me, it just kept going back to that idea of taking what they know and reasoning it for what will happen.
Yeah, and it's more than just it's also like imagination comes to mind because you can't see it, so you somehow have to picture like there's something better out there, right? Like I can see what's in front of me, but there's something out there. And where does it say this? Faith is where does it say? Confidence in what we hope for, assurance about what we don't see, right? Which means it's something you imagine and you say, I'm going to picture what that would be if I could see it right now and act accordingly. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I also had the observation in verse 13, admitting they were foreigners and strangers on earth. Which is just that admission, it's the same thing. It's like that imagination. It takes a lot to think, this is not forever. This feels forever. Like my home, I go home to the same bed every night. This feels very permanent. But they had a different perspective that we're strangers, we're foreigners. This isn't forever.
Yeah, and it's more than just like this place, but also the people. Like you think about the way that Abraham left his family, left his hometown, left places, and it's not just like, well, this location isn't where you belong. It's also this community that you say, this is where my identity is. And it seems really important, right? It seems really important that this tribe I'm with, and it says, well, actually, maybe you're not. Like to live in this world and say, I'm not actually a citizen of this world. Like my loyalties, like if you are actually traveling to another country and you're like, look, I live in France now and I'm not a citizen of France. You have a certain like, it's not that you don't care, but there's a distance. And you say, there are some things here that do not affect me the way they affect you. And so, but if you're actually in a country where you're like, no, I'm in America. Like I've always been an American. I feel like an American. I don't feel different. But to actually have that imagination to say, actually, I'm not exactly a citizen here. Not in the way you think, right? Not in the ultimate sense. And so that's hard because it just feels very natural to just go with it,
I noticed the different kind of life stages or circumstances surrounding different people. For one thing, I mean, in verse 3, it says, by faith we understand. So like we are in the hall of faith, as we might call it, right? Like we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, but it talks about everything from childbearing, parents, and then this beautiful picture in verse 21, by faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshiped as he leaned on the top of his staff. Like, it's just a beautiful picture to think of, that all the way into, and you know, again, we know the whole story. This is reason to live in the land, as we say, to like read the Bible and know the stories, is to look at Jacob's life and say, wow, at the end, he worshiped as he leaned on the staff.
Yeah.
Like that's one of the most inspiring things. If you're ever in our services and you know, we sometimes have the privilege of standing in the off stage and looking out at the congregation. And when you see someone who has worshiped Jesus their whole life and they're standing there worshiping and you just,
and they might be leaning on their staff. They're leaning on a walker.
Leaning on
you know
a
what
walker,
I mean?
and you're just like, that is incredible. Or they're even seated. You know, we had a volunteer for years that served so faithfully in Kids World, and he used to say, I can't always stand in worship. Like my body doesn't always allow me to do that. But when you would look out and see him with his hands raised, seated, and just knowing that this is someone who, if I had looked back at his life, you know, there were blips in the road. I'm sure, you know, there are things there, but to know that he worshiped as he leaned on his staff, he worshiped as he, you know, sat there. That's a precious picture when you think of it.
It really is. I had another repeated word that I noticed here. It was the word commended. I think it's in verse 1, and then later down in verse 5. It might come up another place. And then I connected it to this phrase in verse 16 where it says, God is not ashamed to be called their God. So there's something there that I think for a lot of us feels like there's no way. For God to be like, you did it right. You know, like you were commended. Like to be like, hey, everybody, I want you to see this example of someone who's like really gets it. I'm so proud of them. Let's you know what I mean? Like there's an appropriateness to say, look, I'm in the kingdom. I'm by grace. I'm not worthy, right? Like this is not but there is something like in the heart of a child that makes you want to be like, I hope my parents are proud of me. Like I hope dad says, hey, did you see what he did? You know, like though that feeling is there. And to think God actually does that. And the thing he does it for is someone who has faith. Yeah. Right. Like these people, I think Carmen Imes, I don't know if she said it in one of the interviews or just off camera when I was talking to her. She's like, one of the things about this passage is that if you actually look at these people, we've seen like they're scoundrels. Like they're not like their actual behavior is not awesome all the time. But there's something about saying, I got on the roller coaster and hey, look at that. They got on the ride with God. Like God carried them along. They trusted enough to strap in and be there for that. Yep. And to be like, that's what God commends, right? When we feel like failures, to say, no. Here's what I'm going to commend. You stuck with me. And sometimes you're still sticking like this, right? Yeah. But God's going to say, I'm not ashamed to be called your God. Yeah. I think that's really cool.
I'm so glad you said that, because I do think you could read this and think like, wow, this is like a distant ambition for people who have much different lives and had a different understanding of who God is. But it's like, if you did read the Pentateuch and you did read through Bible study, you realize like, hey, like Abraham, Noah, like all these guys, like they had issues. We didn't get into the second half of Hebrews, but you mentioned guys like Samson and things. Yeah. It's like there's actually a lot of sin that's not mentioned in this chapter, which I think instills some hope in the reader.
Yeah. No, they're good movies is what I kept thinking. Like you could actually make a movie. I listened to a podcast recently where they were talking about, you know, what it'll be like in New Heavens, New Earth. Like, what's it going to look like? What's it going to be like in the new creation? And one of the things they talked about was like we'll be able to just like watch movies of like people's lives, like these people's lives. Yeah. And that'll be great entertainment because we'll be able to talk to the person and actually hear it from them. And then like in the form of creating art, like we'd be able to actually then watch it on a screen. Like if you think about movies in the new creation. Okay,
Yeah.
well, that's the kind of movie, right? Like you can see something
be
like that.
sweet.
It's a good movie. Like it's an actual good movie. And I thought,
Suddenly I'm thinking of like, there's some of these things that are going to be like, cover your eyes.
that's true.
It's like-
Except really, we're at that point, doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Oh my gosh.
That's good.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to one of the M's in comma. Let's start with meditation here. I'm going to go with verse 6. I'm going to give you 45 seconds to prayerfully ponder this verse. Without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. All right, let's talk about the other M in common. Let's talk about message. What principle can we get out of these verses?
Yeah, I did a lot of writing on mine, which is always when you can tell I've taken had to really consider what this word or this phrase might look like. And the phrase I landed on is reasoned faith leads to radical living. And it's because, as I was saying, like I just kept seeing the way that people reasoned, like, okay, I can have this confidence because of what I know to be true. And then they did something. Most of them, there was some radical living. I suppose, Sarah was enabled to bear children. That's not super radical, but the child she bore was quite important. But I wrote a little note in the corner too, that like teaching is part of making disciples. And when we think of things like people deconstructing faith or having doubts or things like that, like to be able to help people have a reasoned faith is something that I think can help them latch on to living that out radically, so that when they have those questions, they've taken the time to really like reason it out and think about it. So mine was reasoned faith leads to radical living.
Yeah, I was struck by verse 13 that I shared earlier, that admitting they were foreigners and strangers on earth. I actually recently was teaching our young adults, and I talked about how for the believer, like our current circumstances, this is as bad as it gets. Even on our best days, this is as bad as it gets. And for the person without faith, this is as good as it gets, right? Like the inverse is also true. And so I was thinking about that as I read this chapter. And so my message was that a life of faith leads to a better home. That there is hope of a better home that is complete in the way that God intended.
Yeah. I looked at that same paragraph there, starting in verse 13. They're living it by faith when they died. They considered themselves foreigners and strangers on the earth, but they were looking to a better country. And so what I said is, we live in our future homeland as strangers longing for a better country. So let me explain what I mean by that. The interesting part is Abraham, when he's saying, I consider myself a stranger here, he's physically in the country that God is going to give his descendants. Like he's in the land of Canaan. He's not like, well, I was somewhere in Egypt or Babylon when he's doing this. Like he's in a place that has been promised to him and his family. And yet he still says, I'm an outsider here right now, which I find very evocative of how we are. We believe in the new heavens and the new earth. I am not thinking I'm never going to see this place again, right? Like St. Charles, Illinois, I don't know what it's going to be like in the new creation, but I'm pretty sure something like this is here, right? Like I don't think I'm never coming back. And yet here and now, 21st century America is I'm a foreigner and a stranger to this culture, this place, the way things work around here. And so I'm living in the place that is actually my king's dominion, and yet it's not yet, but I'm living in the hope of that future thing. It's this weird kind of mind game that you're in. So what I said is we live in our future homeland as strangers longing for a better country. All right, let's turn to the A in comma, application. What do we do in response to these things?
Well, my message was reason faith leads to radical living. And so I wrote out, if I want Jesus to find faith on the earth, then I need to be sure that my kids and the kids entrusted to me because of what I do, know what God has done and they know his faithfulness so that they will they will reason that they too can act in faith. Because I have the opportunity to influence not only my own kids, I often say, I praise God that my children, as they're growing up, are still choosing to follow Jesus and to be a part of the church and are very engaged in the churches that they're in. But what will delight me even more is seeing my grandkids follow Jesus someday, because then I know they believed in it so much that they passed it on to somebody else. And I know that they believed in it so much they felt like it was worth teaching it to someone else. And I think that comes from the stories of and knowing God's faithfulness and having that reasoning that I saw this happen. I heard it in God's word. I saw it happen in my family. My parents told me the ways that God was faithful to us, that they held on to this. And so I'm able to act out in it and even pass it on so that Jesus finds faith on the earth, right? Yeah. And I think that too, of all the kids that are entrusted to me, my prayer is they wouldn't go through that season of, doubt and deconstruction, but that they would think, man, I was taught in such a way that I can reason, that it is okay for me to think through this and to reason and to say, yeah, God has been faithful. So I can continue to act out in this. I can have confidence in what I hope for and assurance about what I do not see. Not just because someone told me I need to do that, but because they've taught me the ways that God is faithful. Yeah. So my application is really pretty personal to me and to what I do as a parent. Make sure my kids and the kids entrusted to me know what God's done. Tell them the stories. Make sure that I've done that in such a way that they can look back on it and have that assurance.
Yeah, I love that vision. I've heard you talk about it before. Like I'm praying for my grandkids to have faith, right? One of my friends, Rob Reno, who does family ministry, he talks about like having this generational legacy. Yeah. And I'm like, I've been praying for, grandkids and beyond. And I'm like, how many generations out do I pray? Like, hey God, there's like at some point, I'm like, I'm not sure I know how to pray for 6 generations out. But like, there is that thing of like, I can actually, trace back like in my wife's family, faithfulness that goes back that far, we know of people. So like, that's what we want, right? Yeah. So very cool.
All right, so my message was a life of faith leads to a better home. And my application is to live today in such a way that proves I know my eternal home is still coming, which is also a really abstract application. And sometimes I say that and I'm like, that's like, how could you even measure that? Like, live in such a way. So
we'll give you points.
So
about that.
So I was like, I feel like I need to narrow down, like, what does that actually mean? And as I started to think, like, what God's been teaching me and telling me, is to share my faith more actively, like to be bolder. Like if I believe that, that I am, a foreigner and a stranger, and that I have faith in who God is and what he's done in my life, then I better do something with it. I better share that. Like, do I really believe that? If I believe that deep in my bones and I've reasoned that, like they say, I've reasoned that this is true, and I believe in my heart, I have the faith to please God, how could I not share that actively and live in such a way that even after I'm dead, I'm still speaking, as it talked about Enoch. Like, is there a way that I can, so it is a little bit of the generational stuff of like passing on to grandkids, but I'm also thinking about my neighbors and friends and people around me that I just interact with that I'm like, I know they don't know Jesus. And I have a responsibility here to be an ambassador of the new heavens and the new earth.
Yeah. So my message was, we live in our future homeland as strangers longing for a better country. So it's that tension of like, some of this is for us and some of it is not. And so the really practical thing is an exercise of going through the things that I am being told really matter, right? Like, so like all the time, people are saying, this is really important. You got to have this product, or you got to support this cause, or you got to, do this thing, or whatever those things are. And there's like an exercise of saying, well, okay, before I accept or reject your premise that this is super important, I need to label this as either passing or eternal, right? Like, that, is it going to last or is it going to pass? And there's like a certain kind of like, okay, which is it? And then the step after that is to say, no, I'm not going to stress out about the things that are actually passing. I read this book and it's called I Cheerfully Refuse. Now, the book has like the value of the book is the title. I cheerfully refuse. It's a novel. It's like this literary thing about a guy who whatever. It doesn't matter. But the idea that he lives in a world that's like falling apart. And part of what he's doing is saying, no, I just cheerfully refuse to be caught up into this. And it's not worth, don't worry about checking out the book. But that phrase has stuck with me. And the attitude I want to have sometimes when people are really worked up about something, right? And we live in a news cycle where it's like, there's a new thing to be worked up about. Like, by the time we're out of this recording, there's going to be some new thing that we're going to be told it's so important, right? And just say, no, I cheerfully refuse. It's almost to just laugh and be like, you know what? I'm living on a 1 trillion year timeline, and that's just simply not going to matter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And not to be bashing and dismissive or inconsiderate of people, but just to say, it's not going to rile me up. I'm not going to let that do that. I cheerfully refuse to be caught up in your panic. Yeah. And there's something good about that, and that creates a presence that actually makes it possible for us to say, hey, can I tell you about something that's way more lasting, way better, a home that's worth believing in? Because I'm not caught up in this, but I can tell you about something better.
Thanks for hanging out with us. Join us again next Monday for a new episode where we'll be looking at another passage from the Bible Savvy reading schedule. And in the meantime, if you're not following along with the reading plan, check out BibleSavvy.com. Also, you can subscribe and leave a review on whatever platform you're listening or watching on. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Email us your questions or suggestions at podcast@BibleSavvy.com. Lastly, tell your friends, and we'll talk to you next week.